Welcome to the INFOWARS Nightly News. I'm David Knight. It's Monday, June 27, 2016. Here are our top stories.
Tonight, COINTELPRO is alive today in the USA, and they are hell-bent on starting a government-brewed race war to establish order out of chaos.
Oh, wow! Oh, wow! Oh, wow! Oh, wow! Oink, oink! Oink, oink! Oink, oink! Oink, oink!
Then, the establishment wants to sabotage Brexit by punishing the UK back into submission. Meanwhile, the United Nations is gaining control over the U.S.-Mexico border. Plus, anti-globalist protesters fight back in California as 6 militant leftists were stabbed when they attacked members of the Traditionalist Worker Party in Sacramento. All that plus much more up next in the INFOWARS Nightly News.
Everyone is talking about the international global crisis that is presented by Brexit, and we're going to talk about that in a moment. But first, I want to talk about a crisis that not too many people are talking about, and that is the constitutional crisis represented by today's Supreme Court decision on Texas's abortion law. Now, we had a op-ed on Slate via the Drudge Report, and this particular law professor is talking about what many people term a living constitution. Let me lay this out for you, and then we'll review what the Supreme Court decision does and why a living constitution is so dangerous. He says, I see absolutely no value to a judge spending decades, years, months, weeks, days, hours, minutes, or even seconds, no seconds, studying the Constitution, the history of its enactment, its amendments, its implementation across the centuries. He says it means that the original Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and the post-Civil War amendments do not speak to us today. Why? Because no matter how smart these guys were, these dead white men living in the 18th century, they don't know about our culture, our technology, things in the 21st century. The problem is human nature doesn't change. Human nature has stayed the same throughout all of history. The Constitution was written to control human nature, not to control technologies. It is bigger than the technologies that we have. It's about principles. It's about the rule of law. Because what he goes on to say is the Supreme Court should treat the Constitution like it's authorizing the court to create a common law of constitutional law based on current concerns, not on what those 18th century guys are worrying about. Understand this. What they are doing is creating a body of law that is independent, not accountable to the written law. You see, we have a written law because we didn't want to let political appointees or a king or anyone else dictate to us what our laws would be without any kind of representation. We fought a war because we didn't want taxation without representation, yet we have not only taxation, but legislation without representation. This is what's so dangerous about this. It is a in-your-face dictatorship by the judges, by our executive branch, by Obama. That is what's happening now. We no longer have a rule of law. Now, these judges swear to uphold the Constitution, don't they? But they shouldn't spend any time, not even a second, not hours, minutes, or even seconds, studying what they swear to uphold, because they are under the Constitution. They are merely temporary stewards of the Constitution. These are principles. We have a process for amending it. We have a process for writing laws, but they don't care about our elected legislature. We have people who want to rule by executive order, by fiat, and that's what these judges are doing today. You see, we also have a secret court, a FISA court, and they are also creating a body of law that they say has the same effect as the Constitution, and yet we're not even allowed to see what that secretive body of law is. That's what should concern us. We have a dictatorship. We have a secret dictatorship, except now they're publicly saying, we want a living Constitution, one that actually has absolutely nothing to do with that written piece of paper that we all swear allegiance to. Now, this is what happened, and I pointed this out earlier today on the 4th hour of the radio show. We had 5 justices. We had a justice that was appointed by Ronald Reagan joining with the Clinton justices, joining with the Obama justices to support abortion, not to act as impartial referees of a law that is created by someone else, because we had a division of powers. These are principles, eternal principles based upon human nature and the understanding that power corrupts Absolute power corrupts absolutely, and power wants to concentrate itself in Washington. That's why we have the Constitution that divides power. But look at what they did. This is a situation where these justices came in, and as Justice Alito pointed out in his dissent, and as the Wall Street Journal pointed out, he was visibly disturbed, visibly angry, rocking back and forth in his seat as he listened to this other decision. What they said in the decision was they basically laid out the number of clinics had been cut in half by these rules. They said, look at how far people have to go to get an abortion, for example. So it was a pragmatic examination of the consequences of this law. It had absolutely nothing to do with the law itself. As a matter of fact, what this decision did was to shut down the Supreme Court's own decisions and the principle of law that has long been held that you don't get a do-over. As Justice Alito pointed out, they had already adjudicated this in a court, they had lost, they had failed to appeal, and now they came back with exactly the same case, the same law, and took it to the Supreme Court. He said it should never have been heard. Furthermore, he said they violated a second fundamental principle of law, and that is severability. It was made abundantly clear throughout the Texas law that all of these different regulations that were put on, some of them said that you had to have someone who was admitted to a nearby hospital to be present there as part of the abortion clinic. You could strike down something like that, but they even struck down fire regulations. And he said all of these regulations were independent of each other, but they took out everything. And it was made clear in the law that they were all severable. In other words, these were independent legislation issues, some of them having to do with safety. And so when you look at this and you say, well, all they did was look at the current society and say, well, we would like to have abortion easily available, and we don't really care what the principles of the Constitution are. We don't care what historically the principles of law have been, so we're just going to fine for that. And how does this work itself out in other ways? I would say to many of the people who are looking at this, look at the story from The Intercept. When they talk about a right to privacy for abortion, think about this right to privacy. We've got the FBI and the police are knocking on activists' doors ahead of the Republican National Convention to intimidate people. And you got the head of the NAACP saying the purpose of these door knocks is simple: to intimidate the target and others in efforts to discourage people from engaging in lawful First Amendment activities. Now, we just talked to Roger Stone the end of last week. He talked about how they have shrunk the area that they had as a security area from a 4-mile radius down to a 1-mile radius. They want to contain demonstrators in a very small area, essentially, well, literally box them in and have them all together, people who are on different sides of the issue, trying to create conflict, but also to stifle and to suppress our First Amendment rights, to intimidate people. Where is the right to privacy when we go to the airport? Where is the right to privacy from the surveillance state? Nowhere. The Supreme Court is no friend to the right to privacy. And yet they will strike down all of these laws and give a do-over to these people, violating all the rules, procedures, and the Constitution in order to further their agenda. This is not judicial activism. This is simply a dictatorship. Simply a dictatorship. And we can see that when we look at the other aspects where this is coming out. Now, when we look at what's going on with Brexit and the crisis that's there, I would say that fundamentally what we're seeing now is stage 2. It looked like they could not win the election, so now the stage 2 is to break it. They want to try to create a crisis. It was a Project Fear to try to persuade people not to get out of the European Union. Now that vote has been taken and they could not shut that down, they are trying to do everything they can to make all of the dire predictions of economic consequences come true. And we're going to take a look at that. But first of all, look at, again, they want a do-over. And we see this from the younger voters complaining, the millennials complaining about the baby boomer generation, saying, we're the ones who are going to have to live with this. We want to be in the European Union, but you're the ones who wanted to get out. Now, just understand, if we go back and look at the history, there was also a referendum back in 1975. 2/3 of the voters then opted to stay in the EU. 4 years later, it had flipped the other way around. Most of them wanted to leave. And these are the people, the baby boomers, who have been living under this EU for 40 years. So this is not about racism, as I like to say. It's not even about economic issues. It is fundamentally about sovereignty. It is about a loss of control. Whether or not you're going to be a serf to someone else, someone who is going to write the laws for you, just as we see with the Supreme Court, just as we see with President Obama, unelected people at a distant location who have their own agenda, and they're not going to allow you to have elected representatives who are going to write the laws. That's what's been going on in Europe for a very long time. It's what we see happening here in spades. For example, there's an article from the Daily Mail, the bonfire of the EU laws, from crooked cucumbers to powerful vacuum cleaners, the crazy Brussels regulations we can now get rid of. And of course, they're talking about things like banning bananas that are too curvy, cucumbers that are crooked and not straight, banning incandescent light bulbs. Oh, we've seen that here, haven't we? Banning vacuum cleaners that are too powerful. And it wasn't just vacuum cleaners. They had a whole list of appliances they were going to get rid of. Even drinking water, they said, does not prevent dehydration. This was a ruling by the European Commission in 2011. See, no matter how ridiculous the ruling, they're going to continue to go with it. And yet today, we see, even after the election, we still see David Cameron doubling down, saying this is about xenophobia, it's about racism, and it's not. It is about sovereignty. David Cameron, when they were having the debates, said, don't vote for Brexit based on the flyers coming out from UKIP. He said there's three issues there. He said they're telling you it's 350 million pounds a week going net to Brussels. No, it's not that much. It's a different number, whatever. It doesn't matter. It can be any number, and Brussels can change it at will. He said they're telling you that Turkey is going to come in. Don't worry, that won't happen for until after I'm out of office. And then he says, and they're telling you there's a European army. Okay. We have an article we're going to talk about here in just a moment. But understand that what they're concerned about is not just Britain leaving, but a whole slew of nations leaving. 40% of Swedes, Poles, and Belgians are in the same vote. And we've also got Finland, Hungary, Portugal, Slovakia, France, Holland, Italy, Austria. Many of those say they would like to have a vote as well. And people are joking about it. If the Poles leave, will it be a pole vault? Or will we have Portugal leaving and it'll be a departugal? It'll leave. Austria, check out. You know, that's the jokes that are coming out. What are they doing to fight this? Well, it's out of the election stage right now. So what they are doing is they're basically holding a gun to people's heads with the stock markets, manipulating these markets. We've seen HSBC get caught 2 times at least, okay, convicted twice of money laundering for drug cartels and for terrorists, getting away with it. We've seen all these big banks now who are creating crisis around Brexit. These are the banks that manipulated the LIBOR exchange, the London Interbank Rate Exchange that is the basis of all variable rate mortgages. We've seen them manipulate currencies. We've seen them manipulate commodities, stock exchanges. Every kind of market has been manipulated by these bankers. And now what they're saying is, this is HSBC coming out saying, well, we're going to take 70,000 jobs out of London. We're already planning to move 1,000 workers from London to Paris, and it's going to start next week. They haven't even started the process of leaving, but immediately they're pulling this out because they want to make it as financially painful as possible, trying to get people to reverse themselves. They saw this happen in 1975. They saw people change their mind. They've already got people saying, well, we got to have a do-over. They're going to try to make it as difficult as possible. They are selling off the pound. We're seeing S&P downgrading the entire country, downgrading all the UK. How long did it take them to downgrade these bankers and these people who were playing games with mortgages in the financial crisis? I mean, watch the movie Big Short. It is the Wall Street financial equivalent of 13 hours. You're watching this, and everybody can see it's a Ponzi scheme. There's absolutely no basis for these mortgages, for Lehman Brothers, for these other companies. They're expecting Standard & Poor's and Fitch and all these other rating agencies to downgrade them, and they don't do it. And these guys are making bets based on the bankruptcy of this mortgage market. And yet Standard & Poor's refuses to downgrade, and these guys went bankrupt. Watch the movie Big Short, you can see that. And yet in one day, you see Standard & Poor's downgrade the entire nation of Great Britain by 2 notches, from AAA to AA. Fitch, meanwhile, moved its rating from AA plus to AA. They dropped them down 1 notch. This is the way they're trying to punish people. And it's not just that. They're talking about how English will not be the official European Union language, will not be one of the languages. Of course, they have 24 official languages. It is a veritable Tower of Babel. They self-consciously reference, and we've talked about the artwork at Brussels and the European Union, how they reference the Tower of Babel for a world government as well. But they're going to remove English. Well, you know, the true nature of English is it is the lingua franca of the 21st century, and it has that status as a de facto status. Not